Tonight's Committee of the Whole, June 25, 2024. Clerk will call the roll, please.
Tauschek.
Here.
Herman. Matsdorf. Here. Gilson.
Here.
Hildebrand.
Here.
Penquitz.
Here.
Binder.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
Let the record show we have a quorum. Next is the approval of the minutes from May 28, 2024. Chair will entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, discussion regarding filing of electric conventional rate case. Tim, I'll let you start it off and then you can pass the gavel if you want.
Perfect. Yeah, my introduction is going to be very short. I'm going to introduce Finance Director Chris Russo, who's going to give some brief comments on this, and we'll have a full presentation on July 9th.
Yeah, like Tim had mentioned, this is really just kind of a heads up for an upcoming presentation on the 9th. Just wanted to get you some information. Ask anything accordingly. So, WPPI is going to be coming in on July 9th to give a presentation on our electric conventional rate case. If council approves, then we will go ahead with that. Just a little bit of background. The PSC is our Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. They're the ones who are our governing body for the utilities. WPPI is our purchase power provider, and Mallory is one of their rate case specialists. WPPI is our purchase power provider because we are distribution. We do not do generation for the utilities. And then just a little bit more on that conventional rate case, what it kind of all entails. It'll be a more lengthier process. They're going to dive into everything from our tariffs, our electric service rules, and then they're going to look at our rates as well. That's a process that can take up to 200 days, so it's not going to be quick. But ultimately, once all is said and done, the PSC will do the final ruling. Just a little bit of background of why we're going for this now. Number one, kind of the PSC sets a recommended rate of return for utilities, especially municipalities. That recommended rate of return is 6.5%. The last 3 years, we've been sitting at about 2.5 to 3%. So we're definitely a little bit under there. And really what that recommended rate of return is to help cover costs. That's what they're looking for there. The auditors too in the past have kind of mentioned when they presented to council, just kind of, hey, this is why we should be looking for a rate increase at some point. Just mainly targeting that rate of return. Just a little bit more background as well. The last rate case that we had filed with the PSC on the electric side was in May of 2015. So by the time all is said and done, it's going to be about 10 years since we've done this. So our rates have not increased since then. But just a few more things to note as well. It looks like from 2003 up until 2015, we had gone in about every 4 years, just as kind of a timeline of when we used to do this. A big reason for this as well is costs. Costs have continued to go up, especially in the post-COVID era. I guess a few items to note. 45-foot pole for us, that's pretty standard. That used to cost $446 in 2021. That same pole now costs $803 in 2024. And then another easy one is our single-phase pad mount transformers. 2020, you're looking at about $1,500 with a shorter lead time. You're talking about a few months. Now we're at $3,500 to $4,000 for that same transformer here in 2024. Now you're looking at years for lead time, right? A year up to even more. So, and just a few more clarifications as well. When we go in for this rate case, if council approves, it will be a test year of 2024. So the way the PSC operates is they look backwards, not forwards. So they're going to look at 2024 and theoretically everything until 2015 since we last filed. So we've done a lot of upgrades since then, so it's really just kind of capturing those costs that we've done into our system over the last 10 years. Final point to note is that substation 5 that's going to be going in 2025, that will all be in future. That will have no effect on this rate increase now, just because it's 2024 and backwards. Right now, and Mallory will be able to expand more on this on the 9th. Right now, the preliminary number that they have for the rate increase is 7.88%, which isn't too bad after 10 years, but ultimately, it's the PSC's final decision. They're the ones who make the ruling on what our tariffs are, what the PSC is, and ultimately what rates will change. So that's just a little bit of discussion on there. Really, there's no action needed at this time. It's just kind of here's some information for council. Any questions, Lee?
Thank you very much, Chris. I think that's very helpful. The last increase was before your time. By chance, did you come across what the last rate increase was when they did it in 15?
At that time, the full percentage, I can get that to you. That I do not know.
Just out of curiosity, 7.8 seems like a lot, but with the cost increases and some of the information you provided, I'm just glad it's not double digit. So, okay, any other questions? We'll be looking forward to the presentation and see what shows up on the 9th. Good. Thank you, very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Appreciate it. Moving on to item 4, introduction and discussion on future library project. I'll ask our city administrator, Tim Blakesley, to start off the discussion and make a couple opening comments. As I said before we started, that tonight's discussion is for information for the council, and if you want to speak, we'll have a sign-up sheet for the council at 7 o'clock, and you can sign up and make any comments there. The public speaking is for you to talk to us, not to engage back and forth. So that's just kind of parameters for the audience if you haven't been here before. Tim, you want to start us off, please?
Sure, Mayor, the only thing I would add to your initial comments is there's no voter action happening tonight at the council level, but there may be direction provided to city and library staff. So I'm just going to give some very brief background, and then I'm going to turn it over to our library director and the consultants. So in 2024, the budget included funding for the library to conduct a space needs analysis. This was funded 1/3 by the city and 2/3 by the Library Foundation. The goal of that RFP was to include initial concept designs and cost estimates for the expansion at the library at its current location for the next 20 or so years, really to be ready moving forward into the future. Throughout the spring and summer, the library, the consultant, and a task force of citizen volunteers reviewed upgrades and updates to the current space. So tonight, our library director, Leslie, will be providing a review of the various concepts with the consultants FEH. The committee tonight should really discuss and review those options and provide feedback to the library moving forward. So FEH review did include some current library building needs. They can kind of go through those in more detail. But those totaled about 1.986 million, and upgrades and repair, those were categorized as urgent, required, or recommended. And then they reviewed the amount of space and square footage that the library should need based on national standards, and I'll kind of let them go through that information. There were some initial concepts, those are provided in your packet. They'll probably also be brought up on the screen for everyone to see. Late last week, there was an alternative option F1 that was also provided, and that's included in your packet. I do note some cost estimates again in your packet. There's various ranges. Option 7B, the total cost, 13.86 million. Option F, 13.2 million, but it does include a phased approach. Option F1, at the time of this memo, didn't have a cost estimate, but I think potentially tonight you'll get a little more information on that. There was a community survey put out by the library board that was sent this afternoon to council members, so you should have received that in your email. And then based on the various options, that 7B, option F, option F.1, There was a number of sort of outstanding questions that staff had on every proposal. Again, these questions were not intended to rule out an option, but really provide thoughts to the Common Council of things to be thinking about, questions to ask. Again, the consultant may address some of these, or maybe you want to ask them to the consultant following the presentation. There'll probably be some discussion about a grant tonight as well. The state of Wisconsin does have a grant opportunity for public libraries and community centers. That maximum grant amount is $4.25 million. Per the grant FAQ, a project below that $4.25 million amount, matching funds are not required, and these applications would receive full points for match funding. Should a project be greater than $4.25 million, a committed balance basically has to be on hand to get full points as part of the grant process. So the committee can discuss the grant and moving forward. My understanding is that there is a process, or with recent information in the grant, and Leslie can touch on this a little bit more. If you don't have a preferred design, I think there's an amendment process where you can apply for funding and try to finalize details moving forward. But again, that 4.25 million number is a number that matching funds below are not required and above are required. Attachment 6 does include in your packet a tax and levy impact. Happy to go through that in more detail if there's some detailed question but that is included in your packet. So just very brief background for me. I'm going to turn it over to Leslie and FEH to go through some of the presentation and other materials. So there is a...
Thank you.
Thank you all for having me tonight. So I'm just going to go through a bit of background of why we started this process, just so you have the full information. So as we started this process, we started looking at what the process was like back in the late 1980s when the original expansion was put on to the library. And I found this quote from Library Director Ann Krieger. It's generally recognized that library buildings should be planned to meet the needs of the users for the next 20 years. Here we are 36 years later, and we're looking at our space again. Reading through the past minutes and looking at the building plans, it's like we're doing it again. So here we are. All right, so a few of the known needs that we know about today that really spurred this process. Small meeting space. In 2022, we did our strategic plan, and we had community surveys and focus groups as part of that process, and they identified that the biggest space need that our community users want is more quiet study space, more quiet meeting space. We have a very open concept design at the library. Sound does carry throughout. We try to keep things quiet in one section of the library, but it can be distracting when you have small children playing, somebody who needs help on a computer, that sort of thing. So that is one of the needs that we've identified. Program space. During the summer reading program, we are at meeting or sometimes over capacity in our meeting space for our summer reading program. When you first walk into the library, you do walk into a half wall. It's very cumbersome for people with mobility devices, with walkers and scooters. You have to turn and go around and then go into the library to find the elevator. A lot of people don't really know where to go once they get to this point, so they come upstairs when a lot of our services actually are on the main floor to help those people who do need mobility devices or holds. We have a copy machine downstairs to make it easy for people so they don't always have to come upstairs if they don't need to. The addition was put on in the late 1980s before the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. So we do have some ADA upgrades that need to be done to make our library accessible to everybody. There's a ramp leading to the meeting room that we need to have a railing for. The bathrooms are not ADA compliant. If you get upstairs, there's no bathroom upstairs. You have to go back downstairs to get to the restroom. There's just a lot of things that we could do to make the library a better, more accessible place for everybody. The elevator has a timer in it that we can't change. We do have a staff member who uses a mobility device who can't always time it to get a cart out of the elevator without almost getting closed into the elevator. If we try to change the timer, the elevator maintenance person has said that it might break the elevator, and it is near end of life. And then the desks and workplaces were installed when we had typewriters, not computers, and modern equipment. So that's just some of the highlights of our needs. But let's just talk about trends in library use. So going back a decade, 2014 to 2023, physical items, this is all physical items, including DVDs, books, all physical media that we check out. This kind of oranger box, that is digital checkout. So you can see when we dipped in 2020, digital checkouts have been growing these past few years. The dip that we've been seeing in physical checkout is actually streaming videos, ebooks, digital audiobooks, kind of those mediums that everybody go online for now. In fact, when we really dug into the data, it looks like our print circulation is actually increasing. And the biggest increase is actually our children's collection and our teen collection. So our younger people are actually checking out and reading more print items. All right. I won't go through this because I already spoke to you guys at the beginning of the year about all of our statistics from comparing to 2023 to 2022. We've seen significant increase in the use of the space, Wi-Fi, increase in library visits, and this chart will show our door count. So from 2019 to 2024, we had a door counter installed in mid-2018. So I really looked to 2019 as the first full year of having the door counter. You can see this line was, the blue line is 2019. This kind of other greenish line, that was last year. So we are seeing increases in door traffic compared to 2019. And then this year we are just skyrocketing. All right, so we're seeing people coming in to use the library, not just to check out physical items. They're asking about study rooms. We've started keeping track of how many times that we've been asked for study rooms. Since August of last year, we've been asked 93 times if we have study room or a quiet meeting space in the library. So after our strategic plan in 2022, and we knew we needed to look at our space to have more flexible options for people. We worked with City and the Library Foundation to fund the space needs study. In January, earlier this year, we put out the proposals. In February, we hired FEH Design, and then planning with the public started in April. So we started forming a library advisory task force. We identified different area groups, Rotary Club, Women's Club, the Chamber sent out emails. I invited this group. We identified 60 individuals to try to start getting word of mouth out about these advisory task force. Because as we know, you see an email in your inbox, you might brush past it, but if your neighbor says, hey, there's something going on at the library, you should join, that's typically how you're going to end up coming to one of these meetings. So we started that in April, and then in May, the state announced a grant opportunity, $107 million of funding for libraries, community centers, and applications are due July 11th. So I will bring on Cole from FEH to kind of go through what the Library Advisory Task Force did, all the plans that we looked at, and all the things that we've done so far.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Okay. So I have a 120-page presentation from the data that we acquired over the last 3 months planning with the library that I will not be presenting tonight. But I will be presenting a 3-page slide that outlines everything that we've covered in its scope of pre-designed services for the library. And so just to define where we're at on a planning timeline for the library, these last 3 months were pre-designed. So looking at options and feasibility studies, space needs evaluation, conditions assessment of the existing facility, community engagement, all of that is information, data collection and planning prior to ever kicking off a design process for a new library. So just for clarification, we're in the phase of pre-design and we're coming to a completion of that, and that would be the 120-page document that outlines all the scope of information that we've looked at over the past 3 months. That's something that we've prepared as a draft and submitted to the library. We'll have that booklet finalized in the next week or so that is available for the public to look at. A supplement to the presentation that I'm pulling up is going to be the website that the library links to, and that's our website. It's fehsparks.com/Plymouth Public Library. And there's multiple ways of accessing that, but that's the best document or website that outlines all of the documentation that we can discuss in detail tonight or review as part of these 8 bullet point outlines of the overall process. So the first thing that I would like to start with is 8 bullet points. The first thing that we do as planners in developing assisting teams and cities in developing strategies for moving forward from a built environment perspective is looking at the city's existing comprehensive plan and looking at the strategies that the city has outlined to determine how best are we marrying our planning with that framework. So the city comprehensive plan, we have one from 2022 that's published on the website, and then we have the 2023 to 2026 strategic plan draft outline that's also published on Plymouth's website. So I would like to just outline a few bullet points outlined in the strategic plans that we believe the library is in conformance and supporting that vision that the strategic plan has outlined. So number 1 is welcoming and inclusive for families. That's a bullet point that is relevant to Plymouth itself, but is relevant to much of the public infrastructure that Plymouth has established and outlined in the strategic plan. Obviously, that's a key aspect of the library, to be welcoming and inclusive for families. And Leslie spoke to a few aspects of that. Some of the disadvantages that the existing library has, being 36 years old. Bullet point number 2, enhance and maintain the city's downtown area. The library is downtown. It's a existing building infrastructure that, according to the city's comprehensive plan, we want it to be enhanced and we want to maintain it in order to represent the quality of life in the downtown area. 4 major bullet points from the 2023-2026 draft comprehensive plan. Number 1 is efficient operations. This is a goal that we're striving towards accomplishing with the library. Further down the list, we'll look at the number 5 facility conditions report and how needing upgrades to the library is in alignment with that efficient use of operations. That includes infrastructure, it includes equipment, and it includes facilities. Financial sustainability is a major component of the comprehensive plan. Part of that financial sustainability category is safe and cost-effective services. The library is one of the most well-known buildings that provide safe and cost-effective services. In fact, many of the services and most of the services are free. Enhanced quality of life, not the third bullet point of the comprehensive plan. Increased, within that category of enhanced quality of life, increased public engagement and connectivity. More activities for teenaged youth. Better broadband connectivity. Road conditions and traffic. These all contribute to the quality of life according to the strategic plan, and the library is the upgrades and future expansion of the library would contribute to all of those items. Just one example is the road conditions itself. The road on Division Street is in need of repairs. There are issues with safety and security crossing the street from the parking lot across the library. That's something that a renovation or expansion would help alleviate, is the concerns for traffic, the conditions of the road. And then the last bullet point that I'll mention from the comprehensive plan is, surprisingly, workforce recruitment and retention. The reason that that's significant is these two bullet points under that: staff capacity to meet service demands and increased employee retention. The library is not just for the public, it's also for the staff, and high quality workplaces and workspaces for staff is critical to employee retention and critical to encouraging more individuals to move into the city, to be able to move into city positions such as that because of the quality of the environment. And then moving on to advisory task force. Both Tim and Leslie briefly mentioned this, but that was the second aspect of our planning process. Was once we've reviewed the city's comprehensive plan, let's assemble a advisory task force so that we have a cross-section of the community represented in this planning process. And that's our community engagement aspect of this pre-design phase that we're planning together. So I believe that advisory task force had a little over 60 people on the task force that were engaged in all of the planning sessions that we did to this point. There were 5 planning sessions that were public sessions. 2 of those were a major full-day design workshop. Goals for success, and like I mentioned, all of these bullet points you will pull up on the library's website. I'm sorry, on it's referenced in the library's website, but it's the fahsparks.com Plymouth Public Library website. So I don't have those in the presentation because we can reference those. But the goals for success, the advisory task force and the library board came up with goals for success for the future of the library and the current and future needs of the library. Most of those goals align with the strategic plan of the city. Space needs analysis was the 4th point that we focused on, and so that space needs analysis involved reviewing the population that's being served. So it's not just the 9,000 people of Plymouth, it's about double that beyond, which is the service population. So that's what we were looking at from a service population perspective. As part of that, we looked at how are the collections? Are we undersized? Are we oversized? Do we have enough capacity for the collections that are housed in the library, based on current needs, not 1988 needs? Staff spaces. Do we have enough space for the staff and the staff's operations? And then meeting spaces. So those are the 3 aspects of that space needs analysis that we did. The population being served, which included evaluating collections, staff, and meeting spaces. As we mentioned before, the 1988, the original is a 1912 building, and then in 1988, the building was added on to, which accommodated 16,790 square feet, almost 17,000 square feet of space. The space needs analysis that we went through looked at the staff, the collections, and the meeting spaces and said, based on what we need to meet the needs of the library, how much square footage is that equivalent to? And we can look at that document as well. The square footage that we need for 2024 and the next 20 years is about 26,000 square feet. So we're 9,000 to 10,000 square feet undersized with the existing facility. Not surprising, because it's been 36 years. Oh, not yet. Not yet. The facility conditions report is the fifth aspect of what we explored. That looked at the existing facility, all 17,000 square foot, including the site and the parking, and we assessed what are the issues, what are the maintenance items, what are the concerns with the existing facility. This is a conditions report that has nothing to do with expansion, but has everything to do with how much are we going to have to invest in the library to keep it as is maintained for the next, and what costs are we going to be responsible for in the next 5 years just to maintain the current conditions of the library. That is also posted on the website that we can reference. But as an overview, we broke it down into 3 categories of the facility conditions report. The first category is urgent. So things that are related to safety or code violations. The second category is required. Things that have gone past their lifespan or things that need maintenance. That could be finishes, it could be the elevator shaft, which is well beyond its lifespan, required items. And then the third item is, or the third bullet point is the recommended items. So these are things that are functional or aesthetic. So the 3 items in the conditions assessment report: urgent, required, and recommended. We have those categorized, and we also have costs associated with each of those. That facility conditions report comes out to, as Tim mentioned, without mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, a little over $2 million. If we look at mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems as part of that maintenance, we're getting closer to about $3 million of repairs that we need immediately within the next 5 years to keep the library functioning properly. And then the public design workshop, that was what we called the Spark session, where the community was invited to do a design workshop with us, pitch some ideas, and come up with some site feasibility studies. So this was a planning and study process in which we looked at the existing site, and then we looked at alternate sites that community members suggested might be worth exploring. So we were able to evaluate over 10 different sites, 10 different alternate sites in addition to the existing site, and look at feasibility for planning a future expansion or a new library on either the existing or a different site. We evaluated a lot of criteria in that. We have a criteria list that helped us analyze, is it best to work with the existing footprint and the existing site, or is it best to consider other sites? And then after we did that workshop, we developed budget estimates. That's also posted on the website. Those budget estimates were for 7 of the feasible design concepts. We also have an operations or an operating cost comparison for each of the sites relative to the existing library. And then the last item is the community survey. After doing this planning exercise, the next step was to evaluate at large the community and gather feedback as to what everyone's thoughts or concerns were with these options that we explored. 62% of the community said we'd like the library to stay where it is. And so that helps us narrow down what the focus should be as part of this planning study. And that would be the board's recommendation moving forward. And then that's all I have to present. I will say though that since the grant is an item of consideration, what we've been asked to do is after we developed some of the options, we got feedback from some city staff. As everyone is aware, option F was an option that proposed taking over the right-of-way and closing down Division Street. We got significant pushback from that for very valid reasons, and so we explored an option F.1, which looked at stepping into the right of way, but only about 10 feet to take the parallel parking and the sidewalk as part of the expansion, and then expanding to the south, taking the alleyway and abandoning the alleyway. So that was the ultimate option that we looked at as a feasibility study that still captures almost 25,000 square feet of expansion for the library to meet the current needs. Our next step as part of that, as we're exploring the grant, is how do we potentially phase that option to be able to build a library that is effective and complete as a phase one with a budget that meets that grant application. So that's where we're at in the process, and that's what we're presenting today as the action item for us on the list to meet the application deadline of that grant with a phased approach to F.1 that also meets budgetary requirements as we establish that together as a community. And that's all.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. As a committee of the whole process, the chair will allow any questions of Leslie and or the presenter to ask questions, clarify things. This is simply a introduction for us with more things to follow, and so the chair will open that up for anybody that maybe wants to ask additional questions. Question, Tim, on the funding grant request, I think that's kind of a big encompassing word. And the deadline looming in July. Is there any way to do a submittal without, let's call it the final design? Is that something to shoot for? I mean,
Yeah, in my
we're
discussions.
kind of under the gun here.
Yeah, my discussions with Leslie today, it sounds like some additional guidance has been provided that you can apply for a grant without having a final design completed. Is that correct, Leslie?
That's correct. So as long as you have your budget spelled out, so, you know, study rooms will be X amount of dollars, the technology that would go into such a study room would be X, the construction of the renovation would be X amount of dollars. As long as you have the budget figured out, the design doesn't matter, as long as your design can match that budget. Does that make sense? You don't have to have like, here's our floor plan that we're going for. You just have to have the budgetary figure for what it would cost to reach kind of a plan. Right?
Absolutely.
So it appears the clarification is there's some flexibility in the grant submission process at the current time. Below that 4.25 million request range. When you get above that, you have to have extra committed funds.
Yeah.
So we could support any grant requests without final design. I mean, estimates obviously are estimates, and not necessarily the entire project, call it the grand prize project, but would those grants still be applicable whole or in part for some of the initial comments of FEH's review, building needs of 1.986 million? I'm trying to think how we can grab some of that and not, I mean, a grand addition is 13 million, we're not gonna have that in place by July 11th. So can we, I don't wanna use the word spend, can we accumulate 4.7 million of needs to go for the grant? And that doesn't require any matching or specific funding process. It gets us in the game, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We want to play ball, but to what extent? Am I making a lot of sense or no sense at all?
I can speak to that.
Okay,
And I'll use a plan as an example to have the discussion, so bear with me as I scroll down to option F.1. Oh, here's. So the question on the table is, what can we accomplish with a grant application that allows to leverage potentially $4.2 million? And is there a project if it's beyond that? Without doing a detailed cost analysis of a phased approach, some of my recommendations and assumptions with that is, we know that a footprint growing to 25 to 26,000 square feet is a $13 million project. The phase, or the F site option, which took the right of way, I believe we came in at 13.2 million as an estimate, and that was with significant utilities being relocated in the street. This is a very similar approach, but we're maintaining the right of way, so we're relocating fewer utilities, if any. I believe that there are some near the sidewalk and some down the alley, so there is still some utility costs associated with this, but at a reduced value. So I would still say that this option F.1 is close to a $13 million project, because we are building out 25 to 26,000 square feet. However, if we looked at what can we do with $4 million, well, or 4.2 million as the grant, well, we know that our estimates for the conditions report is close to 3 million. So we could make all the required maintenance and upgrades to the existing building. It wouldn't necessarily give us an expansion. So then the question is, can you have an expansion that's less than $4 million or $4 million? And the answer, I would say, is not likely. I think once we start considering $6 million, we're in the range of being able to do a phase 1 expansion, which doesn't necessarily include the whole footprint you see in purple, but the whole footprint in purple is 4,000 square foot per floor, just for reference. So if you're looking at that diagram, if you were to build out 4,000 square feet along Division Street and not the alleyway area, and I'll pull up the site plan, or the floor plan for that. The alleyway area is meeting spaces. Critical to the program, small and large meeting room, but if we were to look at chopping off the alley portion of the project for a future phase, we'd be looking at a 4,000 square foot expansion onto the existing. The challenge is, to do the expansion, you really have to do a full renovation of the existing, and including removing the existing stair in the entryway, infilling that opening atrium on the second floor to capture more space. And so we're looking at square footage that maybe closer to 20,000 square feet, but we're still having to consider a cost per square foot at that 20,000. So if we were looking at a $6 or $7 million project, we could feasibly add on 4,000 square feet of the phase 1 on Division Street and do some minor renovations and upgrades to the interior. The $3 million of conditions report upgrades would be part of that regardless, and you would be getting more of your money's worth in a renovation and expansion project by doing a $6 or $7 million project than just making the $3 million upgrades. Does that kind of explain where we might be with from a 4 million versus beyond that perspective?
If we exceed the 4 million, do we have to have matching funds? Do we have to have a funding plan to go from 4 to 6?
Tim, do you want to speak to that, or?
Yeah, my understanding is per the grant requirements, you need to have matching funds in place.
If we exceed the 4?
We would just be docked points in that specific category. It's a 10-point category on the grant.
Correct, you don't get the full points.
Yeah. You could show pending funding as a possibility. Obviously, fundraising will be a part of this as well. But fundraising can't count as matching unless it's pledged.
Okay.
The city street. For me, I would like it left alone. I mean, it's a street, we fought for streets in the past. I think the only ones on this committee right now is John, me, and the mayor that went through that process of just keeping the street, and we lost it anyway. So keeping that street would be my priority. The other thing is, I agree, you have to do the ADA, that's a given, you know, and some of your upgrades, it just has to be done. But this plan here, it looks like you can just flip it west, the exact same plan west, and not even bother with the street.
When you say flip it west, you mean?
Put it to the west side of the building instead of east side.
You're talking the green space now.
Well, the new space.
The blue part, or purple?
Yeah, move it around the corner is what you're saying.
Yeah, just put it to the west.
Flip it over to the left.
Over here is what you're proposing.
Correct. Go westward.
We don't own, the city doesn't own this corner.
Yes, I realize that, but then you were, you know, what I was reading through, you know, the old Willow Glen building, so you're ready to buy into something like that. Why wouldn't you be able to buy into something like this if it's possible?
Right, great question, and the issue is getting the proof of purchase contract for the grant application. That's not to say that were you to get the grant application with this concept, and then you were able to purchase that in the process, you could adjust the footprint and the plan to not encroach on the alley and take that adjacent property. So I think from a funding perspective with the grant, you still have the opportunity to work out the plans, and they could take a very
Definitely, if you want
different
to go for that
shape.
funding, I'd definitely go for it. I mean, it's a money thing, you know?
I've been in discussion with Newmark, Frontier's broker holding company, and they have said that they will not sell that parcel to us.
Okay. John?
Just to follow up on Greg asked about when he said lose a street, all you're doing is losing the west parking spaces, right? The street is still the same.
More narrow.
Yeah, it's becoming more narrow. But,
Like, I don't understand how that would be safe. Right, like, what's walking across, just a crosswalk? And now the street's gonna be more narrow?
Yeah, so the strategy from a street plan perspective is, right now, there's not protective curbs, so parking is not enclosed. What this does is, the road doesn't narrow, we just eliminate the parallel parking where we are expanding the building. And then we have drop-off and parallel parking with protected curbs on the north side. So we can do hardscaping and landscaping and even furniture scaping on the street that would help slow that street down, control traffic, and create a safer environment than what exists today.
John?
I think in reality, if you do narrow the street by taking out the parking space, there'd be no vehicles there, so say a child crossing would be more obvious than if they went between cars and came out into the street. So either way, I'd kind of like to see that narrowed down to eliminate that danger of kids going between cars. Because that's my biggest worry.
Any other comments or questions? There's more to come, obviously.
Yeah, and for me, when you say that, well, then every street in Plymouth is a safety issue. Every single one.
This is more high traffic, I mean, for pedestrians, I would think here.
Well, the problem with that though too is the fact that the parking spaces for downtown park. I mean, you see a lot of people parking there for being downtown, especially the restaurants.
Well, and we do need handicap parking relatively close to the entrance, wherever the entrance would be too. That, of course, makes the assumption that we could vacate the alley. How close are we to the south or the north side of the Verizon building?
We would have to get some more exact measurements for you. We would have to talk with Attorney Feber. I had some initial conversations. If it is an alley to be vacated, there's some regulations on how that goes. Typically, the lot is split to the adjoining property owners or who owned it previously. So we would have to do some digging on that. If it is just a city-owned parcel and not an alley, then it would be city property. But we'd have to get some more information on distances.
Yeah.
So you could eliminate the alley altogether.
Well,
Potentially.
if we don't, depending on how it was deeded, I think what Tim is saying is the general process is we get half and the Verizon gets half. So then the whole alley isn't accessible is what we're saying. If that's one of the possibilities. So then we'd have to acquire the other half of the alley if it was deeded half to the city and half to Verizon in order to accommodate that full purple draft that you have, which is now occupying the alley or whatever it is. Yeah, we don't know that answer yet.
Definitely a lot to think about.
Well, it's a big project, and I think, Leslie, you said it best, we're planning for 20 years, not for 2, but we never know what that is.
Well, I guess 2 points. I thought I'd like to see an option where we would go to the northwest and take over or purchase the old Culligan building and build that way to the west. That was the other thought I had. Was behind.
Angie, you had a question?
I was just wondering, budget and taxpayer, like what's the plan?
Maybe, Tim, you could maybe comment on what Ayler's drafted up quickly.
Yeah,
We're
so Ayler's had
fast
some.
approaching our 7 o'clock deadline, so we need to close this off pretty quickly.
Yeah, so Ellers did have some initial taxpayer impact, so that's attachment 6 in your memo. So there's 6 options in attachment 6. Now these have to do with the option F and option 7B, so I didn't have the F.1 when this was made. But if you look at the bottom of that, it says total, that yellow line. That total is if this project debt was issued over 20 years. So that tells you what the taxpayer impact would be. And now this does factor in some current debt that is offset. But for example, option F, the full project with no grant at 13.2 million, a taxpayer would pay approximately, you have to subtract about $500 from that total amount, about $3,100 over 20 years for that. And that's an average home. And then it changes per various options. So option F phase 1, which was just 3.3 million of debt being issued, would be approximately $700 or $800 over 20 years. So it sort of ranges based on if a grant is received or if the full project is done. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And then the other attachment 7 is debt service. And again, there's 6 pages here that goes over the various options, whether a grant is received or no grant is received. And this would be levy impact. So if you look on the, basically the total column in the middle, that shows the impact on annual levy every year for the city.
Okay, thank you much. I'm going to have to cut it off there. We're approaching our 7 o'clock for a common council meeting, and safe to say there's there's more to come and information that we have, the websites have at the library. I think some is on the city website, if I can say that.
Correct, so it's on the library website, this packet is on the city website. I think direction that Leslie would like to know tonight is information about the grant from council. The vibe I got was if it is below that matching threshold, see if you can try for the funding. That's sort of the vibe I was getting from council, but I didn't hear from everyone. Again, it doesn't mean that council approves the project, that would have to come down the line, but I just want to make sure that's the vibe that I got tonight.
And we're talking under 4.2 or 4.7,
4.25,
4.25.
I think we should try some.
I don't see any reason why we wouldn't want to make an effort. We can always pull the string depending on what comes up, but certainly to be supportive of the effort, I think is a good thing. So any council members have a problem with that?
That's my,
Yeah, yeah,
that's my vibe too.
okay.
Go ahead, try.
Okay, that's the direction
Okay, that's
to
it.
pursue and see what happens and keep us in the loop.